The personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, this is Debbie Reynolds of the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss privacy issues with industry leaders around the world to give businesses information they need to know now. So today I have a very, very special guest on my show. This is Gail Gottehrer. She runs her own practice in New York. She focuses on emerging technologies. She's absolutely brilliant, and I'm super happy to have her today on the show. Gail, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for that overly generous and kind introduction, Debbie. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Hi, everybody. My name is Gail Gottehrer, and as Debbie said, I currently have my own firm based in the New York area. So my practice now focuses on emerging technologies. So things like autonomous vehicles, drones, robots, biometrics, AI, and how the law is trying to catch up to them. So some of the legal and regulatory issues that apply to those or will apply to those technologies, and also given that those technologies and devices collect and use such significant amounts of data, and a lot of it very sensitive personal data, the cybersecurity, privacy, and ethical issues connected to that data, and then by extension to those devices and those technologies. So that's what I'm focused on these days, and it's great to be here with you, Data Diva.
That's quite a list, Gail. I wanted to tell the audience how we met. So Robert Childress, who's the president of the Masters Conference, asked us to be on a panel together. I had to look this up. So this is, I think it's 2017.
Yes,
so this is about a year before GDPR came into full force. And we were like, hey, this is coming. You need to pay attention. One of the really interesting things about that panel was that was the first privacy panel that I had been on up to that point that had all women. So it was 5 women and 3 women of color. So we had Kikoi on there, Park, who's Asian, and then it was me and Amy Tao. I'm African American, obviously, no one can tell that. And then Amy is of African descent, also from the UK, and then Jennifer Mylander and you. So
yep.
That was, not only was it a fun panel because it was all women, because you typically go into these things, it's all men and very few women and extremely low number of women of color. So it was a really dynamic panel, but I felt like we all had such a good synergy together. Like we played off of each other really well. And then in the future, we all, collectively have done other things since then. So you and I have been fast friends, and we decided many years ago we would collaborate on stuff. So we've done quite a few things. So you've collaborated with me on the e-discovery for corporate counsel chapter that we do in that book annually for privacy. And then you asked me to collaborate with you with a book that Amy Tao actually was editing about GDPR.
Yes.
And then we talk a lot on different panels and conferences. And so we're always, I feel like we're just always into some trouble somewhere.
Exactly. And you were kind enough to join my cybersecurity subcommittee of the New York State Bar Association Technology Committee. I appreciate. And soon our second annual Thought Leadership Conference report will be coming out. So, and I think that group is another really good example of a cybersecurity focused committee that I specifically wanted to make sure had a good number of women and women of color, people of color generally, because cybersecurity data just in general, as you know, and as you mentioned, we often see women being so vastly underrepresented and people of color being represented and underrepresented, and especially women of color being underrepresented. And it's every time I read something about, oh, we're looking for diverse talent in cyber, we just can't find it, I want to scream. So part of the subcommittee in our publications is really to emphasize, if you're looking, look no further, because we found these women for you and these attorneys of color, and they're brilliant, and you're not compromising any kind of expertise or anything. Quite the contrary. These are leaders in the field who I feel just need more of a light shined on them, more opportunities for public speaking, more opportunities for publication, which very often, just due to the structure of law firms or other organizations, often don't go to younger women, women of color, women attorneys, people of color. And still we see so many panels, like we like to refer to as manels, right, that are all men. And not to pick on men, because I think there are some tremendous allies. And I'm very fortunate that my co-chair on the NISBA Tech Committee, Ron Hedges, is a huge ally for women and getting women involved in things. But I think it's incumbent on all of us to really try our best to help. And we have a law student and a college student on that subcommittee, both of whom are women, and kind of giving them a little healthy push in the right direction is a tremendous thing to do, and hopefully more and more people will feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, Ron. Just a shout out to Ron Hedges. He's amazing.
He is awesome.
He was a former judge. He's a senior partner at Denton's now. He actually reached out to me a while back. We're going to do a panel together in January.
Oh, great.
For a healthcare organization. So I was very honored and very thrilled, but I think had we not crossed paths doing the cybersecurity stuff in New York, he might not have known me as well. So I think that was fun. I mean, so your master plan is working, Gail. I think that's what that means.
And, it's interesting because that's something the three of us have in common, is starting out in e-discovery, because Ron wrote some of the really groundbreaking foundational e-discovery opinions when he was a magistrate judge in the District of New Jersey years ago, before he retired from the bench and went to Denton's. And we both started out in the e-discovery world years ago when it was first starting, back when people thought it was a fad and it would never catch on, and kind of looked at us strangely. And I think it's interesting how that's evolved into bigger and bigger data issues and more complex issues, and privacy and cybersecurity really kind of became a natural outgrowth of e-discovery.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think you branching out into emerging technology and me moving more into privacy is sort of, to me, a natural progression. Like, those are things that I think we were naturally interested in.
Yeah.
And there are things that we ended up working on anyway in some way, shape, or form. So I want to work on data problems before they become problems on the legal side. So
right.
I think that was really important.
Absolutely.
Before we get into these questions, I want to tell you something that happened a couple weeks ago that I think you get a chuckle out of. I was doing some research on automobile telematics, and I had done a video about it. But the research I was doing, I seen some white papers and articles and different things that I was doing in my research. And I found this one white paper, and I thought, this is really good. And I looked down, I scrolled all the way to the end, and there your picture pops up. And I should have known that Gail wrote this, or she was a part of it. It was very well written, very, I feel like a lot of people, when they're talking about legal issues or technical issues, they want to do it in complicated ways that make it seem distant, or it makes it seem like the person can't really grasp it. So I really like the way that, you did talk about complicated issues, but you broke it down in a very common way that anybody could have read that paper and understood. So I should have known that Gail was part of this.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad that's your takeaway, because that's really my goal, because I think that's part of the problem, why we have trouble with attorneys not feeling comfortable delving into technology. And I confess, I'm the first one. I have no math or science background. I went to law school because there was no way I was doing math or science. But certain things, you just learn. We learn complicated things as lawyers all the time. Statutes aren't easy in a lot of cases, but we learn them. And I think technology is the same way, and especially now, because it just pervades litigation, M&A, any kind of law that you practice. Back in the day, people said, oh, you don't have to learn e-discovery. You know, I do med-mal. It's one box of documents. I can do it by hand. And it's like, okay, maybe. But today, that's not the case because everything is email, everything is texting, everything is data, everything is stored somewhere, everything involves the cloud. There is no case that really doesn't involve data and privacy and cybersecurity and even litigation, right? Discovery, if you don't know litigation holds and what that entails and how to assess what data your client has, you can't really help them with an effective litigation hold, which could lead to spoliation and could lead to dispositive sanctions in a case. And in discovery, if you don't understand data, you can't ask for the right data. And then this is something Ron focuses on a lot, and I've learned a lot from him. You know, is it admissible? Depending on how you got it, how you preserved it. If you don't know the right way to get it admitted, it's not coming into evidence. And those are, you know, then you're not crossing the finish line, right? And that's ultimately what matters. And then to your point, if you get it introduced, but the jury doesn't understand it or doesn't care because you're essentially speaking, you know, legalese to them, you're not helping your client either. And I think that's what modern day litigation looks like.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would love to delve into quantum computing. So I did a
Yes.
video about this recently about post-quantum cryptography because it interests me. Because I thought, as I was thinking about quantum computing and learning more about it, and I thought this may impact encryption. And I know encryption is a hot issue and stuff like that, but I wanted your thoughts about quantum computing, like reasonable cybersecurity, things like that.
This is another example of us being completely in sync, Debbie, without even knowing it. So I recently wrote an article for Thomson Reuters, which I think is coming out in March, on that very topic about quantum computing. And I'll confess to you, the hardest part was that they gave me a 1,500 word limit. And even many drafts did not comply with that limit because it was so hard to try to boil it down to something simple. And again, not being a math science person, I confess it took me a lot of research. But I think the important takeaways is that, as I understand it, and again, this is completely not scientific, is that quantum computers, because of qubits and how they exist in superposition, which you can think of as if a coin is spinning, it's not heads or tails, it's both. And then, so it's in multiple spaces or ways of being as opposed to binary zeros and ones as classical computers work. And then you have the concept of entanglement, that when these coins are entangled, when they fall, they're both going to fall the same way as they're programmed to every time, no matter how far apart they are. And that creates tremendous opportunities for programmers to determine things and also to store tremendous much more data than classical computers can deal with. And because of that ability to process things in parallel, so on parallel paths, if you think of going through a maze, as opposed to going once from the beginning and walking all the way through, with quantum computing, they can go through all different ways at once, at the same time in parallel. So obviously you're going to reach the end faster because one of those ways will work, as opposed to going the wrong way, starting again. So this gives quantum computing tremendous extra power and ability. So the connection to cybersecurity and cryptography is that cybersecurity is essentially these algorithms, like the RSA algorithm, are built on prime numbers, which again, we're getting into math that was not good for me, like once I hit 7th grade, but prime numbers, very large prime numbers, where you have to factor them. And finding the factor of a very large prime number is hard for classical computers to do. And the amount of time and computing power it would require is more than it can handle. So algorithms, those things are secure because classical computers can't break them by solving that math puzzle. Quantum computers, however, since they can work in parallel and much faster, are very good at cracking these puzzles and doing factoring. So the idea being that if we get to the point, and the projections maybe 2033 or so, we'll get close to that. But if you can have a quantum computer that can figure that out quickly, it could break the algorithms that much of our current cybersecurity is based on. So now NIST is focusing on post-quantum cryptography, trying to come up with algorithms and encryption keys and things that will work in a post-quantum computing world, and it'll work with quantum computing to possibly improve security. But I think, and the point of this article is to, what does that mean for laws like the CCPA, the New York Shield Act, where right now you have an obligation if you collect personal data, which under both laws is very broadly defined. New York, it's any individual or company that retains personal information, private information of a New York resident. You don't even have to be based in New York as your company to be under that act. So what does that mean in terms of having reasonable cybersecurity now, right? So what does that mean in terms of what safeguards you have to have in place, given that this technology is still evolving, right? It's nothing you can say now. Who knows if the threat will be as grave as predicted? Maybe it'll be just as much as people predict. So if you have sensitive information, you have banking information, what do you need to be doing now? So I think that's a really interesting question for companies to start looking into, because if you have very secure, very sensitive information that you know will be targeted by hackers in these, and there are already predictions that hackers, even now before quantum computing, are trying to steal secure data now, even though they can't crack it. They can't crack the algorithms and hold on to it till quantum computing gets here, and then use that technology to crack those algorithms and decrypt that information. And when you think about the kind of information that a lot of companies that have long-term value, you could really be a target. So even now, before quantum computing gets here, there may be things you need to be doing now to be deemed to be complying with those laws. So I think it's a fascinating question.
Wow, I should have called you up when I was doing my research for this, because you basically said the whole thing. I don't know. And the way I think of quantum computing is, let's say you had like a privacy fence that was 8 feet tall and it was sufficient. If someone walked past your house, they can see. But quantum computer is like someone getting a 15-foot ladder and just looking over your fence. So it's like the safeguards that we had in place before may not be sufficient when quantum computing becomes more popular, more commercially available, or
Right.
just, I don't know. I feel like all these big technology changes, there's always laggards.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one where the companies that lag behind or can't or aren't thinking about this problem are going to be in bad shape, I think. So I think the best thing is, and just like you said, like NIST, I know is working on this problem. And encryption is not the only type of cryptography. So there are other types of cryptography that, or ways that people can do cryptography that could possibly not be broken due to quantum computing. But I mean, it just sort of remains to be seen how that works out. But I was really fascinated by this. And I found actually an article by a mathematician from NIST about this particular thing. So just, I was just waiting to find someone to talk about it. So now that I know that you and this guy from NIST is really interested in it, we'll be talking about that a lot more.
I think it's fascinating, and it goes back to something that you and I talk about a lot, which is data minimization, in terms of what's reasonable. Even if you can't buy a product now that's going to protect you from whatever quantum computing turns out to be, the answer is always have less data. Right? Especially if it's sensitive data that is going to fall within the CCPA or the CPRA or the SHIELD Act, and you're going to be in trouble if it's breached. Even under current law, forget about quantum computing. If you don't need it and it doesn't have commercial value, just get rid of it. Hopefully more and more companies are doing that, because, as much as storage may be cheap, risk is expensive.
Yeah, risk is very expensive. And I always tell people it's that server in the back room that no one wants to talk about, that is unfortunately probably connected to the internet, probably not patched, probably out of service, or it's out of warranty or something like that. Like that is your weak link. So even if it's data that you don't know you want to use again, maybe it's on a legacy system, that could be the doorway or the gateway for a hacker to get into your other stuff. So I mean,
Absolutely.
it is risky, even though it doesn't seem that way. I would love to talk about AI and
Yes.
privacy. So I know this is a topic you love to talk about, but
Yes.
what do you think are the privacy? I obviously have my opinion. What do you think are the hot privacy topics related to AI right now?
Wearables concern me. And that now, especially with COVID, we have so many more of these AI products that are being used. And the technology is very cool, right? So the idea that some of these AI products can diagnose you coughing and know if you have COVID, or can track, do contact tracing, all sorts of things. I think the potential is tremendous, but the privacy risk is so high. And it's an interesting thing about the pandemic. I think it's accelerated technology and innovation by necessity, right? 5 years ago, someone had said, you're going to get to a point where you're going to be running the court system, the school system, and your law practice on Zoom. You'd be like, that's never going to happen. That's impossible, right? Zoom is something a few of us know about that we use for conferences, right?
Yeah.
We'll never be using it for depositions and court hearings and trials and all that. But here we are. And not to pick on Zoom, but these technologies, we asked too much from them, or we expected too much from them, and we rushed to use them because we needed them, and we didn't really think about a lot of the guardrails and a lot of the just what data we're collecting, where are we storing it, who is it being shared with, is it being anonymized? It was more like, can we get it working so kids can have some sort of an online classroom tomorrow? And I worry that a lot of the wearables are like that people take for granted that this is collecting really sensitive information about you. In a lot of cases, biometric information that is not like a password. If it gets breached, you can't just change it. Your retina scan, or with facial recognition technology, your bone structure, the distance between your eyes, that kind of stuff is who you are. And if that's breached, there are really significant consequences for people. So as much as I think wearables are great, and I know people are very conscious of monitoring their health for good reason, and hopefully that will be something that'll post-date the pandemic, people being more focused on their health. It just worries me, again, where's all this data going? And have we put enough thought into what we're collecting? Do people really understand? And especially, you talked about the webinar you're going to do with Ron about medical, telehealth kind of issues, medical issues. Telehealth is another thing. It's been really helpful for a lot of people. I think it has a lot of benefits. But again, where is all that data going? You have people doing online therapy, talking about their lives. What kind of technologies are we using? Because I think people assume either that this information is HIPAA protected, or it's being stored in accordance with some law, and it may not be. In most cases, if you download an app, you don't get HIPAA protection along with that because you're not covered by HIPAA. But I think people think medical information, HIPAA, it's safe, and that may not be the case. And I think if you have informed consent and people are willing to share this information subject to certain contractual agreements, that's fine. But I worry that a lot of people don't think about that and don't understand what they're quote unquote agreeing to or consenting to, and that there are long range consequences from that people might not be aware of and recognize later. And that's why we kind of have a lot of backlash about technology, because people don't really understand at the front end what they're giving up, or what that free app is taking, and that's why it's free. And then they find out later, and then people kind of reflexively say, oh, technology. And we need to do a better job, I think, having people understand that your biometric information, your health information, you need to ask a few more questions before you just download that app.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I have to tell people this all the time. And actually, I think there was some senator or something, I don't know, in the last few months, they were talking about COVID and saying that his health information was covered by HIPAA, and whatever form in which this data was shared, it was not covered by HIPAA. Now, I think a few people did like let him know that. It's like, no, it's not. It's really not. I mean, your example about the person coughing and then the wearable being able to tell whether they have COVID or not. One of the reasons why this is concerning, let's say that data goes to your medical provider. Like, let's say the app is a medical app that your doctor or your medical group has. When you're sharing that data with them, it is protected under HIPAA. But let's say, like you say, you download like a commercial app, and the only protections you have are consumer protections, and there really is there is hardly any ceiling to what people can consent to. So I think you couldn't. It's not legal to sell your body parts, okay? On the black market, but you can consent to almost anything, and that's one issue that I have with sort of consumer protections with privacy anywhere in the world. It's like you can have people consent to almost anything. Just to play an app, someone may have to, maybe the terms of services that the app has, like the worldwide exclusive right to your image forever. That doesn't seem even. That doesn't seem balanced with,
right.
I'm going to play a game for like 30 minutes and you have my picture, it's going to show up on a billboard in another country in 10 years. That doesn't seem right.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like if people really understood that they would consent to that either. And I think another technology another way AI has been used during the pandemic that's concerning is video interviewing. And it's interesting because Illinois has come out with a law this year about that, which, it's understandable. It's convenience, like so many of these technologies are, that rather than have people travel, especially for screening interviews, you have people on a screen and you run the video, you record it and you run it through AI. And, best case scenario is, and I think this does motivate some companies, the idea is that when we have people do interviews, people bring their own biases, either intentional or unconscious. And those of us who've done employment law at some point in our careers always train people who do interviews, like don't ask about age, don't ask about the year the person graduated high school, because that could be a backdoor way to age. Don't ask about if a woman has children or can work overtime. We train people on all those things, but sometimes we still find out, or it's alleged that improper questions were asked. So I think running it through AI could be a way to try to eliminate that human bias, but I think we take for granted that AI has biases. Again, hopefully not intentional, hopefully just unconscious biases being programmed in by the programmers, just because people are wired in a certain way. And the way we design algorithms reflect who we are, how we think. The data we put into things reflect choices and potentially situations that we don't zero out before we use certain data. But things like facial movements or accents or word choice, all sorts of things, or severe expressions is, some phrase that some technologies pick up. I think we have to be more cognizant that even in our attempt to make things fairer using AI is a tool. Like we almost ask too much. We ask it to be perfect, and it's not. We have to recognize its limitations and how people can work collaboratively with AI, because otherwise we talk about AI bias, AI ethics. AI in itself can't be ethical, right? We can't write ourselves out of the equation or, kind of abdicate responsibility for the results of AI. It's human designed technology, and we're using it for decisions that affect people. So as much as we'd love to have some perfect self-effectuating technology that always reaches good results and ethical results, we're just not there.
Yeah.
So we need a healthy balance, back to your point about balance.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. So I think, I feel like technology doesn't have context. So you need a human to be able to bring the context into the data that you have. And then also, you're right, you can't abdicate your responsibility as a human to make the final judgment. Even though a lot of people think computers are magical and they're perfect and they do things right or whatever. Like, we need to know, and especially about algorithms and AI, is important that those things be transparent too. Like, people need to be able to review what's happening there. It needs to be like a diverse group of people doing that. I know a friend in New Zealand. That's his work. He reviews like algorithms and AI for bias and things like that. So when I look at movies about technology, it's always like the evil robot, like the robot is taking over, the robot is doing this, and it goes right to your point about the abdication of responsibility, feeling like things can get out of hand, and they absolutely can. But we as humans have to be the leaders, and we have to be the people who are making the decisions, and also being able to figure out what makes sense or what's the best use of that technology.
Yeah. I think we're going to see more AI audits. I think that's something we're going to see more of is how do you check these AI products? How do we really figure out, how do we make it explainable? How do we understand that? And I think that's important for lawyers because more and more we're going to see decisions that involve AI, either in the employment discrimination context or in algorithms used for bail or sentencing, or if you're a recidivist, things like that. More and more of these cases are finding their way to court. We're starting to see more and more decisions, and especially in the criminal context where somebody's life and liberty are at stake, lawyers are going to have to get comfortable asking the right questions or working with experts like your friend who you mentioned to gain a sufficient understanding to make sure that people's due process rights are being protected.
Yeah. And I would love to talk a bit what's happening in the autonomous vehicle world. I know that's your love and your passion. What's going on and we need to know.
I would hope that the pandemic has made people realize that autonomous vehicles, which some people call robot cars, which I hate because, again, it evokes these ideas of transformers and these evil vehicles taking over the world. But, you know, I think the pandemic has shown us that there are so many uses for these kinds of vehicles. And we've seen an expansion of one vehicle, Neuro. You may have seen them. They're like delivery vehicles. So they look like little kind of like Volkswagens, that kind of oval vehicle. There's no windshield. There's no driver's seat. They open from the side, almost like a hatch comes up, and they carry groceries or whatever consumer good you need, food. And they've been approved, and there are lots of them on the road now, primarily in California. And, you know, I think this is important. I know people have very strong opinions about autonomous vehicles, and we're still not there yet. We're still dabbling with all the complications of level 3 vehicles, and some companies are skipping over and going to level 4, and Tesla complicates the whole conversation. But I just think the reality is now this year we've lived through the fact that we may not have people who are able to operate vehicles, right? We have shortage of people operating ambulances. We've had just a shortage of everything, or healthy people. We may really get to a point where we should start thinking about if we can have certain vehicles operated on their own, especially in a time when we've had lockdowns where there are fewer people on the road. So I would argue the safety issues are mitigated. You know, we could set aside certain road areas. There's a lot of benefit to these kinds of vehicles, even for just government use. Take away individual ownership, or them being used as robo-taxis, where that's another development. Just this week, Zoox is coming out with these robo-taxis that they're using, which are interesting because they're not retrofitted other vehicles. They're designed just to be robo-taxis. But every time I see images of people who potentially have COVID driving themselves to wait online to get a COVID test, it just strikes me as odd. Like, if that person has a really high fever and is really sick, do we want that person driving, right? You know, it's amazing that, thank goodness, there haven't been accidents. But the idea of all these sick people driving themselves to get tested, where we could be doing this using autonomous vehicles. And a lot of hospitals have been using them on closed campuses for these purposes, moving around materials. We just, at the point where people need to socially distance, these kinds of technologies can be extremely helpful. And I think we've seen some more comfort level with these autonomous technologies, whether it's the robots in airports that are riding through and sanitizing areas, or the other kinds of like the sanitizing robots using the UV lights that are cleaning offices, or some hotels have had robots that check people in. and doing other tasks that people don't have to do. There are a lot of really positive ways to use them. And, again, nothing's perfect. Everything's still in the development phase, but I hope that one thing we take away from the pandemic is that it's an opportunity to open our minds a little bit more rather than just condemning these technologies because they're not perfect, kind of embracing them where they are and working to make them better. Because especially with driving, the reality is people are not good drivers now, right? If we expected perfection as the level for anyone to drive, few, if any of us would be on the road, right? If people have an accident, we don't take away their driver's license in most cases, unless something egregious happened.
Mhm.
But because there have been a few autonomous vehicle accidents, which again are absolutely tragic, and I would still argue they're extreme situations, but since there have been a few of these accidents, a lot of people just call to scrap the whole idea. And I think that's the old, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We don't do that in the case of humans. So are we applying a different standard of perfection or reasonableness to this technology rather than being a little bit more rational about it and then saying, okay, we have problems. Are these quote unquote safety drivers really effective? Should we have more regulation? And the ongoing debate now, and I think we'll see it again next year, should it be federal law or should it continue to be this patchwork of state law, which is sort of like privacy or data security? That's what we have with AV law now in this country. Should that be changed? But I think we need to have the conversation because there's just too much positive, the potential for people who are disabled, who can't use their legs, to be able to have mobility and operate these vehicles with their voice, telling the car what to do, people who are legally blind, older people. We have an aging population, and unfortunately now we have a population that's going to have long-term health impacts from COVID. We're going to have more and more people who aren't going to be able to drive or who are not going to be great drivers because they're going to have physical limitations. Autonomous vehicles offers them opportunities for mobility, and to the extent that states and localities are going to have to provide transportation like Access-a-Ride, these are huge opportunities. And there's so much that autonomous vehicle technology, even if we never reach level 5, which is, you can sleep in the back of the car and everyone will just get to where they're going. That's a beautiful world. I would love that. But even if we never get to level 5, we can still do so much good for society, for people, just by getting to level 4 and just improving what we have now. I hope that people take that away. That's one of the positive takeaways from this challenging year that we've had so far.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into my question. So if it was the world according to Gail and you got to choose and do whatever you wanted, what would you like to see related to kind of privacy laws, regulations in the US or anywhere in the world?
I would love to see people start to take the things more seriously, like really to value privacy. And, we talk about it all the time. And sometimes when you give people examples, like this is like your example with an app, like this is what you're giving up, or this is how much information one company has about you. Or still now, like when certain people, they tell you, oh, I was on a website and you'll never believe this ad popped up and it was for something I'd just been looking at. And you explain to them how that happens, and what cookies are, and they're mortified, God bless them, but I think if more people really focused on that, and so we could have people being less willing to just give up information without saying, hold on, if I give you this, how are you going to protect it? So if we had, and I don't know if we'll see if the CPRA being more like the GDPR, how that impacts the US, and if we see that move east, as we do with so many laws that start in California and move east, we'll see if that really catches on. But I would hope, I don't know if the answer is what kind of regulation, if it's federal law, if it's state law. I tend to think that federal privacy law will be very complicated, and I don't know that that's the answer to all these problems. And it's certainly not going to be able to come along fast enough to solve things anytime soon. But, I think individual empowerment, people recognizing, this is important. This is my identity. This is something about me. Maybe I should think a little more and at least calculate it and, a little more seriously before I make a decision to share everything or to keep putting things on Facebook. And, going to Clearview AI, when we were talking about AI, the idea that they had like 3 billion images, that's really scary, even putting aside how they used it and all the web scraping, and that it wasn't just it's scary enough that it was intended for governmental use, but the fact that they gave it to shareholders and people had it on their app and were using it to check out their daughter's boyfriend or whatever. I mean, that's terrifying. 3 billion images, right? Like, that's a huge amount about you. And that if it's true what the Times article said, that they could pick up a picture of you on an app and it would search that whole database for things about you, that's terrifying. That's like one of those bad movies that you were talking about technology. And, I think people don't think through that. But I would wish that more people, and not to scare people away from technology, because again, I love technology and I really think it has tremendous potential to change and improve the world. And even aside from that, it's just a reality we live with and we have to try to make better. But I worry that, we obsess about things like this and don't understand how anyone else doesn't. There are a lot of people in the world, Debbie, who don't think about this, not all the time, but just like even a little of the time. So I would make everyone really care about privacy in my perfect world as we're driving in our autonomous vehicles that are electric, right? So we're helping the environment, and I'm hoping we're good. I think we will see. It'll be interesting to see what President-elect Biden's green energy push looks like and what that does for electric vehicles and technology in general. So I'm optimistic about that.
Yeah. Wow. I'm gonna have to listen to this again. This is very educational.
You're so sweet.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have you on the show. This is an excellent session. I'm glad we were able to do it, and I'm excited to be able to share this with people because I think your description of quantum computing is the best one that I've heard so far. So it is so complicated. So being able to have people to really talk about it in ways that even I can understand.
Believe me, it took a lot of reading because it's definitely not easy to get your mind around, again, for those of us who went to law school, because we were not meant to do math or science. But, I think that's a good, for people who know me and know that I am not a science person, if I could get my mind around this, hopefully that would inspire other lawyers to say, I'll roll up my sleeves and embrace technology rather than saying maybe it'll go away or we'll hire some first year and they'll take care of it. Hopefully the legal profession will realize that we have to really embrace things beyond Zoom. And as great as Zoom is, I think we're going to see technology not go away post-pandemic. I think it's going to change the way, law is practiced and courts run. So it's a great time for people who are willing to see the law in that way to really carve out a different way of practicing law.
I agree with that. So, wow. So we're at the end of our show, and man, we could probably go on. You and I can talk for hours about the stuff. So
yes, we usually do, but it's been so great joining you, and I'm so thrilled that you have this series, Data Diva. So happy for you. You're amazing.
Thank you so much. So we'll talk soon.
Sounds good, and thank you again for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Very welcome.